at the Air Force Academy and adjunct here and there, a few other places. Buzz, I wanted to say, is the only person I know that willingly left beautiful Colorado Springs area to go live in Washington, D.C. And I think maybe we'll hear a little bit about that along the way.
Yeah.
So please welcome Buzz Walsh. He'll be talking about managing security polarities.
Which is just a jazzy way of maybe addressing an old problem. So permit me to wander a bit and provide some background. I think I owe you a disclaimer up front for anyone coming thinking that I was going to be offering a solution. I'm actually coming here with problems. And I don't mean in a therapy kind of sense, because I probably wouldn't be limited to that. But a lot of the work I do with the federal government and with other governments and commercial firms, they have tasks that need solutions. And I thought I could either come and maybe define a problem space relatively narrow and talk about an approach or some technology that was applied towards that problem. But that would just be maybe bringing some information to you all, but that's not helping the government any. I'm actually going to do the reverse. I'm going to take a relatively broad area of problem. Any of you that are going to go into the security or the IT fields, whether that's in industry or in government, you're going to have to wrestle with that problem. And we need some solutions. My clients mainly are, and I'll get to that in a bit, we work with long-term solutions. So hopefully you're comfortable with that reversal. If you're uncomfortable, I'm sure you'll get your money back. I saw the suggestion box right next to the shredder there in the office. So just apply for a refund. And please interrupt me, because again, my motivation is to try to engage you all with some of the problems that are down the road. I will gain from getting questions from you, and actually the core of the presentation is a list of questions at the end. So your questions are as relevant and as valid as my own. But let me give a little bit of background. The obligatory, my employer, again from a campus setting, and it really, you've probably heard this before, it doesn't seem that long ago that I was right there. Now you look up here and you see an old guy, but what you don't realize is we don't think we age on the inside. Your parents probably tell you this all the time. But the nice thing about employers is they pay you money, right? And I put 2 kids through college here, largely on this employer, because the military never pays. But good thing about this employer, other than letting me come out and share with you, is they address a wide range of problems. Lots of employees. We're always hiring, by the way. Lots of sales. They work with both the commercial and the government space. In technology, most of the problems are no longer confined to just government or just industry, or it's just an academic problem. It's a multidisciplinary, multiple client-based problem. That's why I enjoy the challenges I can get with them as an employer. That's why I'm very supportive of efforts like CERIAS, because they see the world as a multidisciplinary, or see the problems in the multidisciplinary aspect, and I like to support that. If you will, this is another role that I play. I'd like to talk briefly about the Information Assurance Technical Analysis Center. I guess I'm losing a little bit. I don't know if I can do anything about that on the slides. But the Defense Department in the U.S. has 9 different information analysis centers. They are functionally aligned. Their purpose is to collect information, whether that comes from you folks, whether that comes from industry, in certain functional areas. There's an IAC, an Information Analysis Center on chemical propulsion, so that they can collect and reuse this. So if you're in one part of the government and you're building a certain capability in chemical propulsion, another part of the government shouldn't have to pay to get access to that technology. Does that make sense? So let's build a clearinghouse to collect and reuse that. So in computer security, in 1998, they created the Information Assurance Technical Analysis Center. If you do a Google on IATAC, IATAC will be on the first page. It's always there. So that's a charter. That's a nicely academic charter in terms of let's collect and reuse technology from wherever it comes in the government. There are, and in that capacity, we actually have 7 different universities that we have relationships with, Purdue being one of them, where we actively engage in either a seminar like this or in research areas. Maybe we make suggestions on what semester projects would maybe produce information that was useful for the government, commercial industry. Again, hopefully it's bringing real-world problems to students and researchers, as well as connecting those solutions up with the folks that have the problems. And at the bottom, there's about $200 million worth of activity. If you translate that into how many people are involved, and that's probably the best metric, we've got thousands of people involved on an annual basis. So there's a good amount of activity, papers, research, projects. If you're interested, just do a Google on IATAC. Now a little more on from the personal side. Most of my clients are government clients, not necessarily just the U.S. government. But we try to find research that target their needs. Today, hiding behind that Managing Security Polarities title, I want to talk a bit about service-oriented architecture security. So hopefully service-oriented architecture isn't a foreign concept. If it is, just ask questions and we'll get there. Defense Department is our biggest client. Any guess why the Defense Department is our biggest client? This is, yes? They like knowing things, and as such, they have the most money. All right? So money tends to make a client. I just wish they knew all the things that the movies show that they knew. I just saw Bourne Ultimatum the other night. It's hard to not like Matt Damon, you know? But I'm like, gosh, I've been in the real version of that room, and if it was only as good as it was in the movies. We were commenting before on Hunt for Red October. The submarines aren't necessarily as jazzy inside as they are in the movie. You kind of wish that we had in real life what we have in Hollywood. But I'm sorry, movies always come into my presentations. I don't know why. Long-term problems. I think that's important, particularly with where you are in your careers. You're interested in long-term problems right now. The short-term problems are going to get solved, addressed, funded, or abandoned before you're well established in the workforce. Translate this to funding and job security, all right? Unless things have changed on a campus, as you leave the campus, those are things that are going to be important. And again, there's my disclaimer at the bottom on why I came here. There's going to be lots of opinion rolled into this. The title might be the most obvious of that. I'm going to get to a little historical construct later. But we tend to build IT systems, networks, because of the performance we want out of them. All right? eBay was stood up to learn more about consumer buying habits. No, it was built to make money, right? We wanted a performance, and it's been phenomenally successful. Securing eBay was a necessary task to get to the purpose. So we often have this performance security tension. We don't build things just to secure them. That doesn't make any sense. Every once in a while, the capabilities of something gets so tremendous that we decide we have to destroy it just to save it. All right? And I could get another movie title in there. I'm thinking of The Ring, The One Ring, if you think of the performance versus the security, but that'll take me too far aside. The consumers always want capability. If I'm a decision maker, And I could bring lots of, if I can sidestep politics, we have a lot of folks about your age in the Middle East right now doing a very hard job. They have an insatiable desire for information. Hopefully it isn't too much of a stretch for you to understand why they need something. What they need, what they think they need when they leave isn't what they find they need when they get over there. So folks are constantly building ways to get them information. The balance, if you will, is tipped towards let's equip them. Let's get them the information, let's worry about securing it later. And my concern on a lot of these long-term tasks is that we can't keep this properly in balance, which is, I'll try to keep as a theme. If I'm a CIO of a firm, what I'm most concerned with is not only making money, but improving my market share. I want to make more money than my competitor. Because if I'm really good, I'll drive them out of business, and that'll make it easier to do my job. Normally, the Chief Information Security Officer raising their hand saying, well, no, but we're going to have to pay to secure that. That's not a popular comment. So can you see that the security is often viewed as the bad guy or gal in this decision-making process? Again, we don't build something. We aren't running a business just to secure the information. eBay has to make money. If it doesn't make money, it goes out of business, and it's awful secure then, isn't it? Right? Well, we've got to find the proper trade-off. Do we have a risk management? That's got to be one of the topics we explore. Again, that's part of the risk management. A course, or at least a topic within the courses. Yeah. I mean, hopefully that's not a new term, risk management. Right, I have to manage it. I can't just say avoid it. I can't say, well, I won't connect to the internet, that way it'll be secure. There are a few cases where that might be true, but that's probably not the standard one. Broad exposure, what I'm trying to get to is everything's connected to the internet. I don't imagine anyone in this room has done it, but if you ever get bored and you're curious, it's amazing what you will find connected out there. And I often say, why would anybody ever put that onto the internet, right? Probably find that in Facebook as well. Why would anybody ever want to put that out there? But remember, that might be true from your perspective, but from their perspective, there might be a need. Business, it's almost no different. Let's see, what is this? So 6 years ago, someone thought it would be an interesting question to just search for classified documents on the internet. Why? I just wanted to see if there were any out there. There were quite a few out there. And that should be disturbing to someone's concern with security. Why do you think they were out there? Guesses? What did you say? They want to know something? Is that people like to know? Did they just post it to know it? Actually, people were posting it because they were trying to get information to people that they actually thought needed to get the information. It wasn't malicious. It wasn't hackers stealing something and posting something. It was folks that were, I think, had got a little bit of imbalance. Maybe they're a little frustrated by the system that they had. So then the security folks could go through the process of trying to rein in some of that information. This gets into more of a foreign affairs and geopolitical and geostrategic issues. From a national security perspective, not many foreign nations want to take on a Western military, if you will, toe-to-toe, to use the military, because the United States has gotten pretty good at that, right? But there are a lot of other things that we're not good at. And it's, if you're going to go, pick whichever metaphor you want. If you're going to go pick on a bully or a strong person, why stand right in front of them at arm's length and, play to their strength? If you're an adversary, you should always play to their weakness, right? Well, our weaknesses are quite accessible, right? Which again talks to why the government is interested in some of the security aspects that I'm going to bring up later. We're seeing this increasingly, if you watch the news, on a lot of politics, a lot of of the terrorist groups that the U.S. and the Western Alliance are struggling with internationally. They're openly using the internet not just as a recruitment area, but as a way to gather information. Because, and by means of cost, I don't have to be a nuclear power to get access to the internet. In fact, maybe I'll use the internet as a way to gain funds so that I can buy the stuff I need. Again, if you're into political science or national security stuff, these are topics of whole dissertations. These are buzzwords, if you will. If you read things like the national economic and military strategies of the United States, lots of things that people in Washington worry about. We're increasingly moving, if I'm Boeing Corporation, Microsoft, or some of our, and the list goes on and on, the way I'm managing my information, collecting my products, communicating with my customers, collaborating with my teammates, is all being built on what's called a service-oriented architecture. How many folks have never heard of service-oriented architecture before? Thank goodness. Okay. Because I didn't really want to get into what that is. That or you're just being shy. The whole concept being, as opposed to defining in advance who my trading partners are and giving them accounts, the traditional way of setting up networks and accounts, this is going to be much more ad hoc and collaborative. And if you look at Western foreign policy, you'll see that that's actually how things work. If you get old enough, you could say, didn't they used to be our enemy and now they're our ally? And then the cynic will say, that's okay, they'll be our enemy again someday anyway, right? It's transaction-based. Countries will plug into our network. If I'm a company, who might be my competition today is my colleague tomorrow. Did you ever follow anybody? Oil and gas? Anyone? No. The cost, it costs so much to put up an oil platform. Those big unwieldy things that tend to sink in storms. No one company, not even an Exxon, can afford to take the risk to set up an oil platform on its own. Because if things go bad, if they can't get the environmental licenses or the well doesn't prove out, the economic loss, the competitive advantage that's lost is so big, it's not worth taking the risk. So they always get their competition to get together and share the risk every single time. So if I'm a British Petroleum, who is part of my network? Who's my competition? My competition today might be in my competition in the United States, might be my teammate on a North Sea drilling platform on the same day. So how do I set up a network? How do I set up, and this is where they're going. So it makes an awful lot of sense from a return on investment, but it raises a lot of security concerns, and my thesis is that we haven't thought this through. Now you'll have to forgive me, the next 3 slides actually stopped and thought this past weekend, and I closed my eyes and I kind of saw something similar to this, and permit me to do a little bit of an age perspective. I thought about asking to try to find the youngest person in the room, because I would guess that the youngest person in the room has not even lived in what I would call the paper era. And again, I'm in denial. I don't think I'm old because I'm not 50 yet. And when I get there, I still won't think I'm old. But there was a time not too long ago, and you'd say, well, why is this important? The CEOs of the company, the President of the United States, the people supporting him, all grew up in this era. This is formative. They know this better than Facebook, and they always will. So if you're really looking at a long-term problem, and I talked to Dr. Farron, yeah, he talked about the human element to risk. In trying to do risk analysis, risk management, there's a human factor to this. This is a big part of the human factor. If you haven't lived through the paper era, and some of you deniers out there, you probably did, but you probably weren't in school yet. They tried to avoid all risk. Disconnect from the net, I have no problems. Information was valued more than individuals. I knew I'd get another movie. U-571. Did you ever see that one? Didn't that have like John Bon Jovi in it in some cameo role or whatever? It was all World War II film, and the goal was to steal the cipher off a German submarine. And there was the name of the cipher program that the Germans used was called Enigma. And the Allied program to steal those machines so that we could reverse engineer and break their codes was called Ultra. People died on both sides of the war just to protect that technology. Now, in a couple slides, as you might guess, I'm going to flip this around. I'm going to show why people are valued more than this. That's a huge change in the human element of risk management. And obviously, there were fewer users. This is probably the era that most of you were born in. Some would argue that we're still here. We're stressing man-machine interactions. We know that machines are talking to machines, but we haven't necessarily made that the focus of the architecture. Again, going back to collaborative networks, Defense Department has millions of systems and machines. A lot of things that work on a small scale don't work in millions. Not too long ago, I was given a very mundane task. Had a bit of a security concern in the military, and they wanted everybody to change their passwords. When you got 4.5 million passwords, that's not an easy task. It's a very simple task, but it's not an easy task. It doesn't scale well. So again, some of the simplest things become very hard when you have large systems. And of course, the number of systems and users we have are getting larger. Here's risk management that I queried about earlier. Everyone says that we have risk now. Everybody accepts we have risk. I would offer that if that system is connected to the internet, regardless of the filters, it's at risk. If you have enough knowledge and money, you can get to it. So this is all about managing the risk, not avoiding it. Information and individuals are more on a par in terms of the decision making. Let me put in an anecdote with regards to timing. Another university is setting up a branch campus in Qatar, the Middle East. They're building, you know what a CERT is? Computer Emergency Response Team? They're building a national CERT. The idea is, as the host nation locals matriculate through the universities, and there's 4 American universities over there. They built the whole city just to house the 4 universities. They want them to take up duty positions in this CERT that will help protect the commercial infrastructure and do all the things that we do in the United States. So I was over there in a capacity with Booz Allen to help kind of adjudicate this between the government and the universities, because they kind of needed a non-university person to kind of be an honest broker. I had run certs before, I knew how to do it, so they thought I was a good fit. So in the middle of all this discussion of how fast is too fast, can we expect the head of that CERT to be a host nation local in 5 years? Was that expecting too much? And we're arguing about what's a reasonable time frame. This one gentleman, very stately, he didn't say a word the 4 days prior to that, but somehow I really liked the guy. And he leaned over and he said, "I was born in a Bedouin tent." And I'm like, okay, he must not have heard, he's probably not paying attention to what we're talking about here, because that sounds like a non sequitur. Why does that have anything to do with what we're talking about? But you know, I'm the American, and I want to be sensitive to what's going on. And so I kind of paused. One of those few times in my life where I actually thought before I spoke. And then I realized, no, he's exactly on point. He's talking about how rapidly his culture is being driven into this information technology. He literally was born in a Bedouin tent. Let's think about how we're moving this culture. Are our expectations too high? This is a critical thing when many of you were born in this era, many of the decision makers. In 10 years, the paper era is going to start retiring, and you're going to be dealing with bosses from this era. We can't forget that aspect of how fast that we're trying to change. Global Information Grid, is that a new acronym? No? The GIG? The GIG is the best thing since chocolate chip cookies. Just ask any corporation, ask the federal government in the US, ask the European Union. This is going to solve all of our problems. All right? Easily 10 million users. That's just on the US federal government side. Right? They don't have ownership over the gig. It's just my clients view this as a 10 million user problem. I said, no, it's a much bigger problem than that because you don't own it. You can't control who's coming on it. Users are valued more than information. 2001, I think most of you were coherent by then. You might have recalled we had a little accident between a US Navy plane and a Chinese plane off the coast of China. Do you remember that incident? And unfortunately, the Chinese plane crashed into the ocean. The Navy plane was crippled and made an emergency landing at a Chinese military facility, carrying with it highly sensitive intelligence collection equipment. Now, rewind to U-571, all right? We had skippers scuttling submarines, taking sailors with it to protect the information on the submarine. 60 years later, we have pilots landing planes in adversarial territory to save the lives of the crew members on the plane. That's a huge change in mentality. And you say, well, that's political or that's enlightened or whatever. But as information security professionals, that's part of the risk management calculus that's going on. And we have to be careful because our bosses might be in the information, the go down with the ship mentality, but we're going to be presenting trade-off analysis that says, well, the people are worth more. Anybody study for the CISSP yet, or Security Plus, or any of those kinds of certifications? Those are great on resumes, by the way. I don't make any money off of that, but believe me, it's a good way to broaden your perspective. Part of that curriculum underscores the value of human life in all of your trade-off analysis. And I guess that would, CISP would be this portion. Any questions, objections? This is the three information security eras according to Buzz. You're certainly free to have your own. I think it's important when we start looking at the trade-off analysis and the human element, like who are your bosses, who's going to be the CIO if you go to Microsoft or Oracle, what their cultural upbringing is with regards to the formative factors. It's going to be very different from yours. For example, texting. We get lots of humor. It's all over the commercials now. If I say to my generation, I sound so old. But there are more text messages sent every day than there are people on the planet. Right? Now, something's going on there. Right? Information is, I'm not going to necessarily comment on the value of that, but the same folks that we send to the Middle East to solve problems in Iraq today, they're solving some of their problems with texting. Completely unsecured, but it's awful responsive. The folks from the paper era have a hard time getting their arms around this concept of texting and this unstructured ad hoc way. But at the same time, they'll embrace a service-oriented architecture as the solution to all their problems. So, a little bit, and maybe you're being polite, service-oriented architecture. I want to try to focus now on the problem. Web services based, so everybody's going to be connected. There is no us and them. There is no British Petroleum, Shell Oil. One big happy family, right? I will produce and advertise services. I can discover things. I can search. I mean, it's kind of the Google concept at large. Now, this is not just talking the internet. I'm talking the U.S. federal government's enterprise will be set up on this. So whether I'm a Department of Commerce employee or a student at Purdue University, I'm a consumer. I can discover data from the federal government. I can propose and describe product and solutions that I have available. Okay? Very enlightened architecture. Exceptionally unstructured. And the goal of the CIOs is to just build the bus that will enable all this. And the agnostic protocols, right? So I don't know how much of this XML stuff is done. I went to school too long ago to really have an idea. When I went back to grad school, I had to learn C. All right, so that'll tell you something. And I did punch, and actually went to Big Ten University, not too far north from here. I typed, and remember, look, I don't look that old. Please tell me I don't look that old. I typed cards. We had card decks that we carried around. And this was early 80s, okay? So about the time you were born, I was punching cards. So this is the structure. This is going to solve our problems. Why is any opinions on why everyone's racing to embrace this as an architecture? You're just shy. Why is this so good? What's the matter with the top-down hierarchy? Well, I imagine all of you are thinking you're just being bashful. You say, well, the reason it'll solve all your problems is because you kind of flip it around. It's not designed to solve any problems. So there's no problem by its very nature that would be excluded from this architecture because I didn't use solving a problem as the basis for forming an architecture. It's stochastic, right? It can handle what comes at it, at least in theory. And that's where I'm going to try to get with a couple more slides. So now let's begin to talk security. Like any system, I don't build it just to secure it. Otherwise, they never would have forged the one ring in whatever that volcano was, right? And then it got out, right? There was a certain purpose for that. It had great power. It had great capability. I'd say here, performance, right? Everybody acknowledges with all these standards, and I think in a future slide I'll show you some of the standards. There's a lot of overhead that needs to go on to make a service-oriented architecture work. It's almost like a broadcasting, where I say I have a service or I say I need a product. That desire or fact needs to get propagated in a protocol that works for everybody. How do I create security in that? Right? Authentication, right? Confidentiality. All of these things. How do you know that I'm a student at Purdue University asking this as opposed to a Commerce Department employee or a Microsoft employee, right? All of these authentications and authorizations have to happen. They have to be facilitated. And they're going to happen with messages. I think I have that somewhere. So that's the XML messaging. So from a security standpoint, what happens if the message doesn't get through? Well, I don't get authenticated, right? So there'll be a service disruption. So we have to build a system that can handle the messaging built on the open standards. But at least in my mind, and we really don't, well, maybe before I conclude, has anyone seen a service-oriented architecture example? Has anyone built one of any scale? Ever even heard of one or read of one? You can say yes, you won't get shot. I just haven't found one. We're building a small pilot, and it's hard. So it's going to solve everything, but we haven't seen it yet. I have an image of this cloud of messages, even if all the protocols work. Because right now, a lot of this messaging is done because you have an account. Someone in advance decided that you were authorized to have that. They give you an account, they monitor your account. So that work was done in advance. Now, anybody can come off the street, and all of that has to get captured somewhere. So in your schematic, I envision just this clouds of message traffic going back and forth, authenticating, authorizing, identifying, Of course, there'll be encryption, so we'll have the whole encrypting, decrypting. That might be illegible. That's usually referred to, and there's several different versions, as the technology stack. Well, what the blazes is a technology stack? These are a representation of the technologies on the open standards that we need to have working in order to pursue a service-oriented architecture. Now, the good news is the light-shaded ones, someone thinks are reasonably well addressed already. The darker ones, the jury's still out. Those are viewed as immature. So we're not there yet. But these all represent open standard protocols where there's usually a collaborative group. Industry, academia, United Nations is involved. I mean, this is being done the right way, but that's the hard way. So these all represent, here's our lower OSI layer, and then the service-oriented architecture layer is at the top. So these are the protocols. Anyone heard of SOAP before? So, okay. This is all about SOAP messaging. So all of this has to happen and work well. To me, this is a little bit intimidating. This is an awful high level of complexity. And I'm not convinced that we have adequately deconstructed what goes on, because if it's so hard to make it work, usually that implies it's very easy for it to not work. And in the security sense, that means to get inside the decision-making process. If I'm using SOAP message traffic to authenticate someone and the message doesn't get through, well, that's pretty simple, right? That person doesn't get authenticated. Maybe they rebroadcast. What happens if I hijack that? I mean, there's all kinds of nefarious things you can do to message traffic. How are we going to handle that? Do I have to digitally sign all the messages to cut out if I say man in the loop, you know what I'm talking about? Man in the middle, thank you. Man in the middle problem. So I have to do digital signature, right? Well, that adds the complexity. Any computational theorists in here? Big O notation. You know what's going to happen when we start having to encrypt and digitally sign everything? You realize the computational cost? Is that adequately being addressed by the architects? Somewhat rhetorical. I don't think it is. I'm not saying they can't build it. I'm just saying I think this problem is a lot harder than we're presenting it. And I'm here to try to champion you all to ask and pursue some of these questions, because they don't have the models, right? If you were to say, here is a simulator of a enterprise instantiation of a service-oriented architecture with 200 users using digital signatures and the technology stack or some subset of that we saw, and here's the performance models we get. That sounds like a small research topic. Does that sound like rocket science? I mean, I just made that up as I was standing here. That isn't that hard to articulate. But I guarantee you right now, the decision makers in industry and government don't have those results. No one's done that. Or if they've done it, it hasn't reached the level that I could find it, versus Google or some of my engagement with other universities. These are pressing design problems, but no one has really explored it. If we find out something now, it can, it's the old early discovery of a problem or a challenge really helps. Kind of like cancer. You're all young, so you don't worry about the big C. But if you find it early, it isn't as big of a deal. And in security, it's the same thing, right? If we can find out we have some complexity challenges now, then we can adjust this as we roll it out. This is the list of policy services in my notes. Behind every one of those, there's 3 or 4. Maybe you've read have you heard of Net-Centric Enterprise Services, NCES? That's DoD's view of how a service-oriented architecture will work. Certain services that are going to be provided for the consumers. These are just the paragraph headings. Each of these has 5 or 6 different services that need to be aligned. And again, I'm saying there's much more behind it. So that, believe it or not, was all preamble, right? Because I now have a list of questions. The scary thing is, I put these questions together literally in about 5 minutes, all right? This is by no means an exclusive list, but what I'm trying to point out is there's many questions that need exploration. These are well within the range of what an undergraduate or graduate student could pursue, and yet they could have disproportionately large impact on decision makers. And we have a relationship through CERIAS where we can get that kind of information forward, right? It doesn't say your solutions are better than somebody else, just that you have better engagement in marketing, right? And in the private sector, that's everything. Just look at a chia pet. Okay, we're talking about that on the way over here, right? Is that earth-shattering of an idea? Where chia pets are out, right? You know what a chia pet is? The little thing? No, but it had great marketing, so someone made a whole bunch of money out of that thing, right? My brother just retired at age 50. What a great goal to have in life, from Hewlett-Packard. And he often lamented as a career engineer, he said, it's frustrating when you see the best engineering products lose in the competitive marketplace. We just had another example, Blu-ray versus HD. Which one is better? Opinions? We could divide the class. We could have a polarity, Blu-ray versus HD. 2 formats enter, 1 leave, kind of the Thunderdome. So I told you I'd get another movie into it. In my era, back in the paper era, we had another battle, Beta and VHS. I bet you every student at Purdue knew which was the better format, because this is an engineering school. We knew that Beta was better. There's no question about it, but they lost in the wars because marketing, market penetration, consumer perception of quality. That's sometimes different than real quality, right? I actually don't know which is better. I'm a Luddite. I'm too far behind. So I just got cable a few years ago at my wife's insistence, all right? But Blu-ray is now one. That's great for users because we now have one standard. That trade-off between standards, regardless of who's the winner or the loser, if I go back to the technology stack, what's the implications if a standard falls out due to a rival? What does that do to a service-oriented architecture? If I built an architecture around one protocol, I don't control that protocol, right? Didn't Buzz just say the UN or someone is all over this? What happens if somebody changes the protocol? Well, I've got the whole corporate enterprise built on protocols that I don't control. Who owns the internet? I'll get to that in a couple of slides, right? From a risk standpoint, you're putting your whole enterprise, whether you're a corporation, a university, if you're the federal government, you're putting a lot of your management and intellectual capital out there on something that you don't control. A small protocol change could radically impact your product and your organization. So, and we'll see that in the question. So these are just meant. I would be thrilled if one of you wanted to propose another question. There are no right answers. Again, Buzz thought these up in 5 minutes. Okay, that's the depth of it. But on the flip side, that shows you what I could get you another movie in, but it's a distraction. There are so many problems out there, it's easy to come up with 8. Right? Certification and accreditation. Does that ring a bell? Do you know what that is? Congress has mandated, again, under a perimeter-based system. Let me use Purdue as an analog. That periodically, to stay connected to the .edu, let's say, somebody has to go and verify compliance with certain university policies and procedures, commercial best practices, to make sure that the Purdue Net, or whatever it's called, is doing things the right way. So that's a certification and accreditation recommendation. Normally, I have to know what my perimeter is to do that, right? If you tell me I have to eat this, tell me how much I have to eat. Do I have to eat the whole pizza or just 3 slices? Give me a problem space, right? To certify and accredit. What about in a service-oriented architecture? What's your perimeter? How big is your pizza? I don't know. Well, why don't you know? Well, because it's a service-oriented architecture. It's as big as you want it to be. And what if I were to tell you an answer today, if I actually knew how big it was at this instant, the next instant it will be different. Well, what do we do with this whole concept of certification accreditation? Congress says to the Commerce Department, you have to do this. A lot of the large U.S. and European corporations are required by governing bodies to certify and accredit their networks to mitigate the risk to shareholders. How do you do this? So we're rushing headlong toward a certification accreditation, toward a service-oriented architecture. Bureaucratically, these are fighting words. There are whole industries, Booz Allen actually being part of them, that this is their business. They make tens of millions of dollars a year by doing certification accreditation for customers. Now you're going to roll something out where I can't do certifications and accreditations. Do you see that this would be a problem? That's an easy question. Now daydream. Okay, it's late on a cold afternoon. You're fast forwarding. You're thinking beyond spring break. That's what I mean by daydreaming. And you're imagining yourself as a chief information officer at Microsoft, or pick the industry of your choice. How do you manage risk? How do you know where you're taking risks in a service-oriented architecture? I don't know what products I'm protecting. I don't even know what products are available. I don't know who my corporate teammates are. I don't know who my customers are. Again, I don't mean to be defeatist, but this is like a chaos. I could take any chaos theory folks out here? Sometimes you find some. That would be a very interesting lens to look at this problem through, because that's its power and its Achilles heel at the same time. And it's amazing how often those two are connected. Since so much is unknowable, I have great capability. But since I have all of these problems, how do I manage them? Because you're not going to last long as a decision maker or leader if you don't know what risks you're taking. I'm approaching the red light. I know I'm supposed to stop. All right? You know what risks you're taking when you make that decision. I can go through the light, and I can see that I'm not going to hit someone. So that's the first risk, right? The second risk is you're probably thinking too much while you're driving, and you're distracted, right? Third risk is, well, what happens if I get caught? What are the penalties for running that red light? And this is a very simple analogy, but do you see where I'm going with this? If I'm a CIO, I don't know where I'm taking my risks. I can't make those informed decisions. I'm not saying stop at the right light every time, but I'm saying know the risks that you're taking. Do we have any tools that could be developed? This is another great academic question. What tools or capabilities could be built to help a CIO or a decision maker make informed choices? Third question. You're now a consumer. Okay? Maybe you're a student at Purdue University and you just want to buy a pair of skis. All right? Anybody bought skis over the internet yet? Come on, I'm a big skier. Someone's got a ski here.
Downhill or cross country?
Yes. But, I guess it segues back to what Randy said, and I did buy a house in Colorado. So I'm going to remedy that. Been in Washington, D.C. too long. It was the only place the military stationed me where I didn't want to go. So what do you think I did after I retired from the military? Stayed, of course. Makes perfect sense. But I'll remedy that. But every time you buy something online, you're making a decision, right? You know that there are risks. You're perceiving, especially with those little icons down, right, that you have a trust domain. And a lot of that was done because of the certification and authentication, and accreditation schemas that are set up for e-commerce folks, right? And if you pursue all those web pages that you usually just blow through, or you have to put the check that says that you read it, but you didn't really read it, and then you hit the submit, like when you're buying airline tickets or whatever. That's driven by the industry standards for this. So how do I do that in a service-oriented architecture? Anything that could be done as a research project will help. Right? Let me get through a couple more, because I know we're running out of time. Now remember, help could be, oh, I get a research paper that I got an A on. Help could be Microsoft coming saying, I liked your paper so much, I want to hire you. So be careful what you publish. Other questions? Don't have time. We alluded to the security trade-offs a little bit before. If I can't in advance make decisions, I'm making decisions by default. And just about every time you're going to default on the side of performance. I don't know what risks I'm taking, but I want to deliver this performance. I'll clean it up later. This actually came up in the messaging. If you ask Purdue Net, let's say you have some student, let's go back to the skiing. Let's say there's a ski club at Purdue. And you got some special discount on skis through the ski club. Well, you're now an indirect participant in this transaction because you're probably going through the ski club. How they have to chain your authentication forward, like your credit card number, right? If you extrapolate this to a service-oriented architecture, this gets very complex. Go back to the man in the middle, because I can't nail this down. Let me skip over the last one that's somewhat mundane. In my world, the top one's a tough one. Go back to the young folks in Iraq. Almost every time, they'll decide, I'll take the risk. These folks need it. They're trying to do their mission. I'll take the risk. I'm not saying that's the wrong answer. I'm just saying I don't think they know what risks they're saying that they'll take. I'd also argue that the risks they're taking are not confined to Iraq or the Middle East or the U.S. military or the U.S. government, right? When we're talking networks, you know how viral things happen. All those viruses started at some time with somebody knowingly or unknowingly take a risk, and it propagates, right? Same thing happens here. Let me leave with a pithy one. Okay? I always find a way to work this in. Give me a little bit of license here. But remember, you are at least the network, or if not the gig generation. Going back to the Iraq situation. A lot of people seem to think that Iraq was all about oil. Right? And it sets itself up well. Certain people want to hear that. And that's because if we go back to like national strategy of the United States, folks like the President and Secretary of Defense and State, they say things like, if we can't get access to oil, those are fighting words. Right? When is this going to happen? This isn't about email. If the internet is how electric power puts on the lights here. Because the power is brokered real time between the utility providers. The infrastructure that's brokered over is internet. If they don't have access to that, they have to build some other infrastructure to deliver electric power to us. I think electric power is important, especially today. Right? I'm become soft. I live in Washington. It's not this cold all the time. Right? Can you extrapolate and see how many other places the internet is critical? So I think this is a win. I don't know the answer to this, but you can see by extension, if the U.S. or even look at Western Europe and the natural gas struggle they had with the Russians a couple years ago, when the Russians started turning off the natural gas supply. When will this become an issue? This is what my answer is to the information security is getting more important. Because all of a sudden information security might regulate why we have electric power or why we have propane in the tanks sitting out in the farmlands because it's provided. So if you're an information security professional or you want to be, I think you have fantastic job security. Because we're not going to solve this in my lifetime. If you're great, maybe you will in yours. Nothing against you, but I think not. I think it's always going to be there. More interruptions, because we're kind of at the end now. All right, well, I encourage you, talk amongst yourself, talk to your instructors. If you have any passion or interest in this, and this is just Buzz's view, you might be willing to pursue a problem that will have some real impact. I encourage you to ask that question. You heard the old thing, the dumbest question is the one that's not asked, right? Ask it, pursue it. Believe it or not, and maybe it's scary, there are people that need this solution. And in about 10 years, we're going to be operating in a service-oriented architecture that I right now don't know how we're going to secure. So I solicit your support towards getting it more secure. No other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, folks. Very patient.